If Frieren the character is meant to show us the heights of magic, then perhaps Frieren's show is meant to show us the heights of production consistency. Yeah, that was pretty corny.
Frieren has one of the strongest reputations in modern anime right now. Ask almost anyone online and you'll hear the same phrases repeated like scripture. Perfect production, movie-level quality, flawless animation, masterpiece visuals. And that's exactly why this conversation needs to happen. Because Frieren's production is being praised for things it doesn't consistently deliver. Let's be clear right from the start. Frieren looks good. Sometimes it looks very good. But good looking does not automatically equal top-tier production. And that distinction is something anime discourse has completely lost. Like and sub. Let's get into it.
Half joking, but follow me here. Frieren Beyond Journey's End, episode after episode for 28 episodes straight on a seasonal anime schedule beginning with a batch of 4 episodes, still managed to simply always look the way it's supposed to. I realize this may sound like damning with faint praise in a sense, but in the age of Sakuga slumps, production meltdowns, regular seasonal delays, and of course shows that are incredibly impressive but also feature many holes and inconsistencies in their production, this is highly praiseworthy, and it of course isn't where the praise ends. There are no obvious holes in Frieren, at least in terms of production quality. Frieren doesn't have intrusive or distracting CG. It doesn't feature any 3D dragons, 3D horses, 3D carriages, core-cast 3D backup models, at least that I noticed, or any of those crowds full of vomit-inducing 3D background characters, which somehow even reared their ugly heads in the final Attack on Titan specials. Seriously, when did this become an acceptable look in what is otherwise a beautiful production? When did this become an acceptable look outside of generic light?
Frieren's biggest strength, atmosphere, has become its biggest shield against criticism. People confuse stillness with sophistication. They confuse soft lighting with elite direction. They confuse emotional tone with technical mastery. And Frieren benefits heavily from that confusion, because when you actually break down the production fundamentals, animation consistency, scene direction, shot variety, visual storytelling efficiency, Frieren is not operating at the level fans claim it is. A lot of Frieren's runtime is built on static composition, extended still frames, minimal character movement, slow pans, long pauses, and yes, that's a deliberate stylistic choice, but stylistic restraint does not automatically mean high production value. In many cases, it means the opposite. True high-level production doesn't just know when to slow down, it knows how to keep visual engagement alive even in quiet moments. Frieren often doesn't. Instead, it leans heavily on background art and mood to carry scenes that lack dynamic visual storytelling.
Novel adaptations. I'm sure a lot of the magic in Frieren probably was CG, and obviously there's always going to be CG compositing present throughout, but whatever CG was there, it was never distracting, even to someone like me whose spider senses start tingling basically anytime the common culprits show up on screen. When I did actively notice the likely CG elements, it was usually also just kind of praiseworthy. What I can only assume were 3D cameras moving through environments full of 2D assets, for example, a technique I really appreciated in both Heavenly Delusion and early episodes of Chainsaw Man as well, or the wonderfully dynamic parallax camera effects revealing hidden layers of details, or warping and wrapping around subjects, something which should, by all rights, be a part of every production in an age where we all have access to programs that utilize digital layers. I mean, honestly, when is there any reason in the modern era not to use these tools when they're so powerful and relatively simple to implement? They can really upgrade what is a very standard production to something that takes advantage of the way that it can use independent layers, and personally I think pretty much every production should be using that to its advantage, but that's just me. Now, there may not be literally dozens of mind-bendingly ambitious multi-minute peak cinema action scenes a la JJK Season 2 in Frieren, but there are a decent few of them, all polished to damn near perfection in this case. And
this is where the overpraise becomes obvious. Frieren's animation spikes are rare. When action happens, it's clean, but it's not consistently fluid, inventive, or ambitious. Compared to genuinely elite productions, Frieren's movement is conservative. Safe, efficient, not daring. There's nothing wrong with that. But calling it peak is dishonest. The directing is another area where fans overinflate quality. Frieren's direction is functional, not revolutionary. It relies heavily on predictable framing, medium shots, static conversations, wide scenic pauses. Emotional beats are often conveyed through silence rather than visual creativity. Silence can be powerful, but overused silence becomes a crutch. A truly exceptional production uses silence as one tool among many. Frieren uses it as a default. And because the story itself is quiet and reflective, the production gets a free pass. Viewers emotionally connect to the themes, then retroactively assign that emotional response to the animation and direction, even when the visuals themselves are doing the bare minimum required. This is the same mistake anime fans make every single year. Confusing narrative impact with production excellence. Another uncomfortable truth? Frieren's consistency is overstated. There are noticeable dips in character motion quality across episodes. Facial animations often remain stiff during dialogue-heavy scenes. Subtle acting through motion, micro-expressions, body language is frequently absent. Instead, the show relies on dialogue and music to do the emotional work. Again, that's not bad, but it's not elite.
Literally every episode has at least a few moments that just dazzle. But perhaps most importantly, there really just weren't any bad moments where I could feel the production truly slipping. To illustrate what I mean, I'm not sure there was anything in this series quite as unimaginably ambitious as the Sukuna versus Maharaja fight, with all those brilliant cuts by folks like Vincent Chancer assaulting our eyeballs in the best possible ways for entire episodes at a time. But imagine if all that flash and flare had the same level of polish that was present in literally every single episode of Frieren. Speaking of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, there were no moments in Frieren where I stopped and thought, oh, yeah, the compositing was a little heavy-handed or unfinished looking there, or, oh, yeah, the background colors and foreground colors just don't quite look fully polished or like they, belong in the same environment, given the way that things are colored. No, everything from the art style to the direction to the animation to the compositing to the color grading just looks as it should. No matter what might be happening on screen, every scene and every moment of the show always looks somewhere between above average and masterful, with a beyond enviable level of consistent polish, which never left me saying, well, that was really impressive, but I sure hope they fix this element or that element in the Blu-ray. What would they fix? But it's not just the polish that's worth bragging about, of course. The show features all those gorgeous parallax camera effects and good uses of...
Compare Frieren's production to actual high-tier anime production. Series that maintain expressive motion even during conversations, that use blocking and camera movement to tell story without words. Frieren rarely attempts that level of visual storytelling. It opts for comfort over challenge. And comfort is not what defines great production. Lighting and color grading are often cited as proof of Frieren's superiority, and yes, the color palette is beautiful. The backgrounds are painterly, but background art quality alone does not elevate an entire production, especially when characters frequently feel disconnected from those environments rather than dynamically interacting with them. This is where Frieren starts to resemble a beautifully illustrated light novel adaptation rather than a fully realized animated experience. Anime is motion, and Frieren often forgets that. The pacing further exposes production limitations. Long pauses aren't always intentional. Sometimes they're filler created by stretched scenes to maintain schedule efficiency. When a show relies heavily on slow pacing, it becomes harder to distinguish artistic choice from production constraint. Fans assume intention. The industry reality is often limitation, and that's the core issue.
CG that I mentioned before, it features not just quick and decisive yet wonderfully dynamic action scenes, but a wild range of tones with some of the most relaxing scenes around as well, all illustrated poignantly through the audio-visual experience. It consistently included wonderful montages without any need for dialogue, as well as wonderful character acting, sometimes hauntingly serious, sometimes absolute peak visual comedy. And those freaking backgrounds, man. Even when they show up for a moment, blurred out in the background of a fight scene that's kind of flying by, they're usually painterly, consistent, incredibly detailed, polished, and just do a great job of ingratiating you to the beauty of the environments and the world building. Every episode feels brisk yet relaxed, quote-unquote slow-paced, even though essentially every episode features not just one, but two key plot lines, which almost always resolve cathartically within that one episode. And fascinating that the show pulls off that strange sense of ironic pacing in a series which is all about the perception of time, but let's not get lost on that. The music sounds great, while blending with the show effortlessly, an effect which, at its most impressive, I think is in large part due to the fact that the first 4 episodes were actually pre-scored, scored with unique music written for unique moments and unique scenes, a technique which was implemented strategically on occasion as the series continued for the long term. But not only does the music sound great, the sound design, the ambience, the Foley nature sounds and the like also sounded really great, and were ever present throughout the entire season. And with all this going on in a seasonal series, it's impossible to ignore perhaps the most impressive part. That is, once again, to say that this basically all persisted from start to finish on a seasonal schedule for 28 episodes straight. And
Frieren's production is good at hiding its limits, not surpassing them. A masterpiece production pushes boundaries. It experiments. It takes risks. Frieren plays it safe. Extremely safe. That safety aligns perfectly with its tone, which is why fans rarely question it. But safety does not equal greatness. Frieren succeeds emotionally because of writing, music, and themes, not because its production is untouchable. And here's the part fans really don't like hearing. If Frieren had a louder story, more action, or higher stakes, its production flaws would be far more obvious. The quiet nature of the series protects it. That doesn't mean it deserves the crown it's been given. Calling Frieren's production perfect lowers the bar. It tells studios that minimal animation paired with strong vibes is enough to earn masterpiece status. And that's dangerous for the medium. Frieren is good, sometimes great, occasionally beautiful, but elite production, no. And the reason this take upsets people isn't because it's wrong. It's because it challenges the idea that emotional resonance automatically equals technical excellence. Frieren is a strong anime carried by atmosphere, not a production benchmark. And until fans can separate how something makes them feel from how well it's actually made, this conversation will keep getting avoided, which is exactly why it needs to happen.
not only is everything of consistent quality, but completely cohesive as a whole package. Now, I'm not the first to say it, but I do think that this can in large part be credited to producer Fukushi and director Keiichiro Saito, who made his directorial debut on Bocchi the Rock, a show which featured tons of strange mixed media presentation choices and a wide range of ping-ponging emotions while also retaining that cohesive feel and identity. This guy's obviously going places. Once again, not the first to say it, but obviously. And this is not all to imply that I have literally no issues with the season. I'll admit that the second or third time they cut from a flashback of Himmel to someone else saying verbatim what he had just said to, kind of reflect the flashback in the present day, I was really starting to feel like they were laying it on extra thick. Like, am I suddenly back to watching a typical cheesy shonen where they try to get away with a you get one kind of moment multiple times over the course of a single season? That did kind of grate on me at times, but every single time, 30 seconds later, I'm just lulled back into a state of ease, unable to find anything else for my jaded nitpicking instincts to latch onto. And sure, if you're not down with the slice of life vibes, then the show probably won't be for you in the long term, and that's fine. If you're not into the subtle and subdued approach to tragedy, what I called unceremonious tragedy in my first video, then maybe the show simply won't be for you. If you came here specifically for a shonen action experience, perhaps you won't appreciate the quick and decisive battle sequences that many of us often actually find quite refreshing, as opposed to something like JJK or Solo Leveling. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, if Frieren's version of a tournament arc simply not having as much thematic depth as the opening arc's analysis of the perception of time and coming to terms with death, or the following arc's bold approach to the demons and their black and white, evil, sociopathic, definitionally inhuman tendencies, if the equivalent of a tournament arc not matching that same thematic depth is enough to do the show in for you, maybe your expectations with the show's intellectual content will simply continue to be let down over time based on how strongly the show opened on that front. There could be any number of reasons that the show simply might not cater to the specific appeals that you're seeking, especially if you're coming to the show just because it's a well-animated shonen, or for, any other number of reasons, but setting the most subjective of personal tastes and storytelling nitpicks aside, I'm not sure that there was really anything truly worth complaining about with this two-core, consecutive, odd episode count show, and I'm just floored by that happening in 2024. I'm also blown away looking at it and imagining how any number of shows could have looked and felt with this level of consistent polish and lack of distracting elements. JJK Season 2 and Demon Slayer are obviously the first ones that come to mind, but I remember hearing so many people say when Chainsaw Man was initially airing, "Oh, what I would give for my favorite manga to get an adaptation like this." No. What I would give for my favorite manga to get an adaptation like Frieren, baby. What's truly crazy is, contrary to popular belief, the show didn't have some insane 2-year-long pre-production phase, a la Dragon Ball Daima, and or a miraculously lax, staff-friendly working environment, a la all the big Kyoto animation shows. It allegedly had a relatively normal, arguably fairly busy production. The series was actually in pre-production as Bocchi the Rock, a damn ambitious work in its own right, was still airing. And as I mentioned earlier, they of course featured the same overall series director. So obviously, there was a point in the production of this show where not everyone was on board. What it did have working in its favor were mostly unheard of connections and corporate backing for a seasonal anime. Both Toho and Aniplex sit on the series' production company, both massive production companies, obviously. It opened with a brilliant 4-episode premiere on a mainstream movie network, usually reserved for the likes of Ghibli movies, and to quote Kevin over on Sakuga Blog to sort of expound upon that point, I quote, "To be more precise, let's first delve into how these first episodes were broadcast, because those are some important details as well. Although streaming platforms have gotten the first 4 episodes of the series separately, they first aired together in NTV's prestigious Friday Roadshow slot, which is to say the type of nationwide, mainstream platform that TV anime is rarely granted. While animated works do earn that honor sometimes, shout out to the Minions movie that will follow up Frieren this week, it's quite rare to see anime in there, other than iconic films such as Ghibli's works. Another recent exception to the norm would be Violent Evergarden, which took over the slot for multiple weeks and at one point had the TV show re-edited to fit its length. What makes that even more relevant, as you might have already guessed, is that Frieren's composer Evan Call was appointed because people like Taguchi were fond of his work on that series." End quote. For now. This all of course got it big exposure early on and likely only further greased the gears to get even more people excited to work on it. Whether that's upcoming talent or industry veterans usually reserved for movie level productions, a la Studio Ghibli or Makoto Shinkai. This is also not only thanks to exposure on a channel typically reserved for movies and more mainstream programs, but also thanks to one of the show's many producers, Takashi Nakame, who also worked as producer on theatrical works Garden of Words and Your Name, alongside director Makoto Shinkai, once again leading to all the more potential connections within the production. The show had competent management and delegation in both production, Studio Madhouse's Fukushi line of production led by Yuichiro Fukushi, and obviously competent direction, once again by the same man who brought us Bocchi, Keiichiro Saito. So, industry connections, a unique broadcasting situation, tons of wonderful individual artists who were happy to sign on when they saw who all was present and how things were going already, ingenious solutions to the issues all too common in anime production, and, hopefully a slightly better than average work environment, but I don't think that any of us really know that one way or another. And yet, the final product. looks like this. And because I see little point in attempting to put it better myself, I'm going to finish out the video with another admittedly lengthy excerpt from one of Kevin's write-ups over on Sakuga blog, which is freely available just for the record, although I do send them a whopping $1 a month on Patreon. But anyway, this is an excerpt from a blog entry entitled "Resourcefulness Reigns Supreme. Frieren Beyond Journey's End, Production Notes 5 through 10. I quote, "While fans tend to think about production circumstances as black and white, Frieren exemplifies what success tends to look like in the real world, a result of resourceful management, delegation of the right tasks to the right people, and ingenious solutions to tricky situations. It's not a secret that the internet hates nuance as much as it loves false dichotomies. Recent events have been brewing a myopic discourse around anime production, where the two popular titles of the moment must necessarily represent opposite ends of a black and white situation. If Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 is such a poorly planned project, then Frieren must be in a thoroughly blessed situation. Hence why its adaptation is so beautiful. We've written at length about the dangers of making such assumptions about perceived quality and labor conditions.
Let's just say it out loud because people keep dancing around it. Jujutsu Kaisen was better than Frieren. Not calmer, not prettier. Better. And the fact that this statement makes people angry already proves how fragile the conversation around Frieren actually is. Because Frieren fans don't defend the show. They defend the vibe. Jujutsu Kaisen, on the other hand, doesn't survive on vibes. It survives on consequence. Frieren is reflective, gentle, introspective. And that's fine. But reflection without pressure becomes comfort viewing, not peak storytelling. JJK constantly applies pressure, emotional, narrative, and structural, and forces its characters to change or break under it. That alone already puts it ahead.
As a viewer, and even the fact that corporations exploit that opacity to whitewash their dubious management. So it shouldn't be a surprise that neither case is so absolute. Even though the schedule was never favorable in the least, JJK Season 2's team has still put together some stunning, fully realized work, especially in its first arc. And despite that being the norm for all of Frieren thus far, assuming that this is directly a consequence of having ample time and a comfortable—
JK doesn't allow characters to stay static. Yuji changes. Megumi changes. Nobara changes. The world changes. Actions have consequences that permanently alter the story's direction. Frieren, by design, avoids that kind of momentum. Characters grow slowly, sometimes so slowly that entire arcs pass without meaningful evolution. That's not depth, that's safety. Frieren's greatest strength, time, is also its greatest weakness. It stretches moments instead of sharpening them. JJK compresses moments and makes them hit harder. When something happens in JJK, it matters immediately. When something happens in Frieren, it often fades into memory before it fully lands. And let's talk about stakes. Because this is where the comparison becomes uncomfortable. Frieren almost never feels dangerous. Even when characters die, the narrative distance softens the impact. Loss is treated philosophically, not viscerally. JJK does the opposite. Death is sudden, ugly, and unfair. And that's exactly why it sticks. You don't remember Frieren because it shocked you. You remember JJK because it scarred you. Another uncomfortable truth. JJK respects its audience's intelligence more. It doesn't explain every emotion. It doesn't pause to let you breathe. It trusts viewers to keep up. Frieren often overcommunicates its themes, reinforcing feelings instead of challenging them. Frieren wants you to feel calm. JJK wants you to feel uncomfortable. And discomfort creates discussion. That's why JJK dominates conversation cycles. That's why people still argue about Shibuya, about Yuji, about Gojo, about morality and blame. Frieren rarely generates that level of debate because it doesn't provoke. It reassures. Reassurance is not better storytelling. It's safer storytelling. Even production-wise, JJK takes more risks. Aggressive direction, unsettling sound design, unstable camera work. Frieren opts for beauty and stillness, which looks nice but rarely surprises. JJK constantly tries to unsettle the viewer, even when it doesn't fully succeed. Trying matters. Risk matters. And that's why JJK sticks longer in cultural memory. Frieren is a beautiful walk. Jujutsu Kaisen is a fall you don't recover from the same way. And before someone says, they're different genres, that's exactly the point. JJK accomplishes more within its genre than Frieren does within its own. Slice-of-life fantasy has room for tension, unpredictability, and transformation. Frieren simply chooses not to push those limits. JJK does. That's why JJK was better, not because Frieren is bad, but because Frieren is comfortable being gentle, while JJK refuses to be kind. And anime that refuse to be kind are the ones people never stop talking about.
Environment at their disposal is a mistake. People should be more careful about suddenly painting Studio Madhouse as a healthy workplace simply because they want to contrast that with MAPPA, because we're still talking about the same company that just a few years ago kicked off the trend of being sued for egregious treatment of their management staff. Extrapolating the reality of the studio as a whole from their treatment of Yuichiro Fukushi's production line is also a misstep, as their status as the studio's stars earns them an entirely different level of resources and staff availability. Even if we look within that one crew, the situation can fluctuate quite a lot. For some recent examples involving many people currently working on Frieren, look no further than the deep troubles their production assistant expressed when managing their episode of Spy Family Season 1, or how exhausted a bunch of them were after the late move from Sunny Boy to Tact Op Destiny. By assuming that their success is a given due to positive circumstances, you're not only turning a blind eye to their occasionally severe struggles, but also can entirely miss how that success happened. This is all quite relevant to Frieren, as many of its triumphs are instead a showcase of savviness and efficient technique. In our first piece covering the series, we already went through the genesis of the project, and for as impressive as it is to convince Toho producers that they want to turn your work into an anime after a single chapter, that was still in 2020. So much time had to pass to accumulate enough material to seriously approach the idea. The time constraints that surround this project on many levels are hardly an industry secret. Even though Saito was obviously entrusted with the series before the broadcast of Bocchi the Rock 1 year ago, he was still quite busy with that up to the end of its run, which conditioned the progress for Frieren. In the official starting guide for the anime, his interview alongside character designer Reiko Nagasawa and series composer Tomohiro Suzuki indirectly gave some hints about how tight its pre-production process was. Nagasawa explained that she based her designs on the then current state of the manga, as styles tend to change notably during the early points of serializations before stabilizing. She specifically singled out up to volume 7 of the manga, which is to say a spring 2022 release for this early stage of the design process where she had to decide on the style to follow. Having personally seen different types of design materials, color scripts, artboards, and the likes, being given the final okay between the fall and winter of that year, that about tracks to a production process that did start in 2022, but has only kicked out in full as the series director himself became free from previous obligations. And for a very ambitious 2-core anime, that means they've had no time to spare. What has made it so different from other titles in similarly tight situations then? A variety of reasons, including the exceptionally high floor when it comes to technique. Frieren has the magnetism of not just a beloved young director who just put out a mega hit, but 2-star animation producers. Everyone on the outside is giving credit to Fukushi, while often forgetting that Takashi Nakame is using his theatrical experience and ampler freedom as the second-in-command to cherry-pick star guests that would normally never be available to TV anime. Not exactly a hyperbole, as he's responsible for the presence of Ghibli-aligned animators who hadn't stepped on TV for multiple decades, and it's not just those who make a difference. Given that tremendous pull, this team has been able to be picky with all of its participants, which is exactly the opposite of the industry trend to hire the first person you see out of sheer desperation. Be it reliable veterans or youngsters who have proven that they can navigate the often obtuse production process, you can save so much time and trouble simply by building a team that will minimize the constant corrections to people's work. If you add that general aptitude to minute but still very impactful specific moves, you can produce a series that punches way above its weight. One obvious example that I keep returning to is the pre-scoring, which they did apply across the entirety of the special 4-episode introduction to give it a special feel, and is now being tactically deployed to much success.
I want to start this by saying something very clearly. because people love to twist criticism into disrespect. I respect everyone who worked on the Frieren project. The animators did their job. The staff cared, the music fits the tone, the backgrounds are pretty. None of that is in question. But here's the part that makes people mad. Frieren just isn't that good, and I genuinely don't care how loud the fanbase gets about it. Because enjoying something and declaring it untouchable are two very different things. Frieren is one of those anime that benefits massively from timing and mood. It came out when people were tired of loud shonen, tired of constant power scaling, tired of chaos. So a quiet, reflective fantasy felt refreshing. And that refreshment turned into overpraise almost instantly. But refreshing doesn't mean exceptional. Frieren is calm. Frieren is soft. Frieren is emotionally gentle. And for some people, that's exactly what they wanted. But that same gentleness is also why the show never fully grabbed me. It never challenged me. It never surprised me. It never demanded anything from me as a viewer. It just, existed. And that's where the disconnect happens. Frieren fans often talk about subtlety and maturity. But subtlety without tension becomes passivity. Scenes stretch, emotions linger, conversations repeat the same ideas in slightly different wording. Instead of sharpening moments, the show smooths everything out. There's no edge. A lot of people confuse that smoothness with depth. But depth isn't about how quiet something is. It's about how much it changes you. And Frieren rarely does. The characters are fine. Not bad. Not amazing. Fine. Frieren herself is intentionally detached, which works thematically, but also makes it hard to emotionally invest for long stretches of time. Fern and Stark add balance, but even then, growth happens at a glacial pace. Some viewers call that realism. To me, it feels like hesitation. The production gets praised constantly, and yes, it looks nice. But nice visuals don't carry a story on their own. A lot of Frieren's beautiful direction boils down to still frames, long pauses, and mood lighting. That's atmosphere, not brilliance. Atmosphere is the easiest thing to overrate in anime discourse, because if a show makes you feel calm, you assume it's saying something profound. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just slow. And Frieren leans very hard into being slow. What frustrates me isn't that people like Frieren, like what you like. What frustrates me is the idea that disliking or even just not loving Frieren means you don't get it. That's not maturity. That's insecurity. I get it. I just don't think it's that special. There are anime that take risks, anime that swing big and miss sometimes, anime that leave scars, spark arguments, force uncomfortable conversations. Frieren doesn't want to do that. It wants to comfort you. And again, that's fine. But comfort isn't peak, and no amount of calm piano music or golden hour lighting is going to change that for me. So yeah, I respect the effort. I respect the craft. I respect the people behind it. I just don't think Frieren deserves the pedestal it's been put on. And if that bothers you more than the actual points being made, that says more about the fandom than the show.